It is an honor to be here with all of you today. I have a gift for each of you this morning. This is one of my organization's resources, our comprehensive chart for the red flags of abuse. This chart is in use by family advocacy groups in the U.S. Navy base in San Diego, by Colorado State Probation Department for their victim advocacy groups, by Prosper, Texas Crime Advocate Center, and therapists internationally and across the United States and Canada. I developed this as a way to help survivors, regardless of gender, recognize quick examples of things that they have experienced in everyday life. So we have therapists who will use this and they'll say, just take a highlighter and highlight everything that reminds you of something that feels familiar, even if it's not exactly the same thing that you experienced. But if it reminds you, oh, there was this other thing and it was kind of like that and it falls in the same category, highlight everything. And then they will look at it and unpack one by one to help survivors recognize that what they are experiencing actually is abuse. We have this in Spanish and in English, both free on our Wilderness to Wild website. Next, I took this and I created a complete video course on it. It's available free on our free mobile app called Trauma Mamas. Worldwide on the Google Play Store and the App Store. I have had women write me that they finished the video course with their earbuds in and their blankets pulled over their heads at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, alone in their beds at night, or rolled over with their phone tucked by their pillow. And that's what got clarity to eventually get them out. So when you were talking about what can I give to someone who's still in it, that's what this free course is created for. And you can find it at ideservetoknow.com/isthisabuse. So it's a sentence for you in the URL, ideservetoknow.com/isthisabuse. And so that free course, it has quizzes after each one of the videos so that each survivor taking the course can get an immediate assessment of how much this particular aspect of abuse may have directly impacted them. You're welcome to take these home, and if you want to take an extra one with you, if we have any extra copies, they can be out on the table. Before I get into everything else, I also have these posters. There are a few copies left after the table got plundered yesterday, but there's still enough for everyone to take 3 or 4 copies if you would like to take them and put them up. So this is the last of my stash that is there. Take them home. I'll print more. So these posters are designed to go on the back of bathroom stall doors in your library, in your pediatrician's office, in your gynecologist's office, in your church bathrooms, wherever someone might want to have this information and is going to be alone. Patty isn't in here. I wanted her to hear this, but I loved how her workplace stood up for her. That was amazing. And 20-something years ago. That was incredible. And what I can tell you is that most churches don't do that. And they don't do it now either. They don't do it now. Most churches, unfortunately, it is getting better, but just as a baseline, most churches, when they realize that someone is reporting allegations of abuse or someone says that they're not safe, the leadership says something like, well, we just have to be an open house for all of God's children. I can't tell you how many cases I've worked with, even just in this area, where their church, their pastor, their ministerial leadership of whatever denomination refused to honor orders of protection, refused to provide safety, flatly refused to remove someone from directly working with children, even though there were stacks of court records about how they were a proven harm to kids. And unfortunately, I've worked with thousands of these cases directly in the faith community over the last 10 years, which has done great things for my faith in humanity, but we will not digress onto that this morning. Going on 22 years ago, I became a pastor's wife. I had just graduated from my bachelor's degree, and then Monday it rained, and Tuesday afternoon we got married. And for the next 13 years, I lived in a varying level of covert and overt abuse, an increasingly unsafe and unfaithful relationship. And I just straight up lied. I mean, my job was to make the pastor look good. So that means the perfect outfit and perfect hair and the perfect kids and the perfect kids' outfits and the perfect potluck dish, perfect smile. And I did a whole lot of social deception because my husband was preaching on TV every weekend and he was a pillar of the community. And to be honest, I knew things weren't good, but it was a long time before I knew how bad they actually were because I didn't have language for it. First of all, 22 years ago, nobody was talking about abuse, especially not among clergy spouses, because as a clergy spouse, especially a young, newlywed pastor's wife, you're the shepherdess, you're the first lady. Your job is to show up and make sure everything looks perfect. Nobody was educating the young people in Bible college or anywhere else what to look for. Nobody was talking about what sexual addiction can lead to. Nobody was talking about coercion or gaslighting or pathological anything. And as long as someone looked good and showed up in a great suit and had a charming personality and was great in the pulpit, that was really all that mattered, right? The idea of talking to someone about what you keep discovering about the secret double life, the leader of the church, the one in the pulpit, that's just unthinkable. So I didn't have the language for it. It was not something I was equipped to recognize. What I did have was a Mount Everest-sized dose of marriage is forever. And if you tell anyone, you are letting down God. And then there's the guilt and the sense of shame, because if you were enough, surely they wouldn't be doing all of these things. If you tried better, if you believed the promises this time, maybe it will be different. And it wasn't, and then it wasn't, and then it wasn't, and then it wasn't for a very, very long time. I tried to be as good as I could be at all the possible things, and it still never got better. And because of that belief system and my naivety combined, those two things were the perfect combination to keep me there 12 years longer than I should have been. And by the time my life imploded, I was 34 years old. I had 2 preschool autistic children, and the person that I had vowed to spend my life with was caught doing things that should have landed him in jail. And then toward the end, it got so bad and scary. There was a time when I called my mom one night and I said, he's got an AK-47 in the trunk and he's headed to your house. Put the kids in the car and leave. And don't take this road because that's the one he's going toward your house. And then I spent time trying to think of who to call and figure out who didn't live in the county and who would he not immediately think I would go to, so that I didn't put anybody that I really cared about in danger. That would be an immediate assumption that he would go looking for. And tried to meet up mom in the hospital parking lot and put 2 sleepy preschoolers in the back of my car. And we slept on the floor in our clothes at somebody else's house. And that was the first time I was introduced to the court system, because his threat that I got to decide how the rest of this evening went, and he had an AK-47 in the car, because I had just told him I was scared to go home with him. His threat had happened in a different county, which meant I had to report it in that county. But I lived in another county, and I couldn't report it in that county because it didn't happen in that county. But for the night, I was staying in this county. And if I wanted to report it immediately, I had to leave my kids at 1 o'clock in the morning and drive over here. And they said, well, we can send an officer to the 7-Eleven and wait for you in the parking lot. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? I have 2 kids sleeping in their clothes in an undisclosed location. And I'm supposed to leave after midnight to go wait for you in a 7-Eleven parking lot to just say, I need help and I need safety. And then the next morning, I went to the county courthouse in my county because I had a friend who was actually in the sheriff's department. And he says, well, this is not good. And he said, another option you have is to go to your own county courthouse and you can file a request for a domestic violence protection order, or TRO, temporary restraining order they had in that state. So a friend of mine met me at the courthouse and sat with my kids in the dingy little lobby area where they had a few greasy kids books while I went into a little conference room area with the domestic violence advocate. And she tried to help me understand how to word what had happened. But like every woman at that point, I was still in full blown make it look good mode, not showing how I felt. And then I didn't know where to go while I waited to see what the judge would say. I didn't know where would be safe. He had over a dozen guns in the house, everything from 45s to 9mm to sniper rifles. And so all of a sudden, I was no longer the senior pastor's wife of a local hospital affiliated church, the big one on the hill. I was a single mom, homeless for 4 months, no job and no income at the time, 2 traumatized kids, a suitcase apiece in the back of my Honda Pilot, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know about things like domestic violence shelters. I mean, I had heard of them. Like, I know that there's shelters for people. And I think probably in my mind, they were kind of folded in with homeless shelters. And they were not for people who had support systems. They weren't for people who went to church and had communities. And I didn't have any idea about the resources that actually were available, even though the resources that were available a decade ago were nothing like the resources that are available now. But more than that, I was simply trying to figure out which way was up. I was reeling from the revelation that the person I had slept on the pillow next to for the last 13 years was actually a consumer of the trafficking industry and had attended anti-trafficking and anti-porn events with me, but was using. And the church leadership responses ranged the full spectrum. I would guess many of you approached your church leaders seeking safety and help at some point. My church leader responses ranged from, we're so sorry that you're going through this, but not really sorry enough to help. We're just really sorry you're going through this, to you are being incredibly unforgiving. You should really pray more. Clearly something is wrong with your relationship with God. Go make a better sandwich. That and get some new lingerie. To actively trying to cover and make sure that they closed ranks around their own to prevent any accountability from taking place. One pastor who had been a friend since we were in seminary called me one day and ostensibly to pray for me. And I was standing in my completely empty kitchen just before leaving the house and not knowing where I was going to go or live. And he started out sounding very compassionate and then moved into questions about my availability to my husband. And his comment, I will never forget, was, you must be frigid or something. And that was when I said I was done with this conversation. There are those who are actually happy for you. They recognize that it's a congrats, not a condolences. There's a whole lot of people who think it's condolences and also condemnation. But then there are those who recognize that it's congrats and not condolences or condemnation. But they don't necessarily realize that when you start that, that getting safe is the beginning of sometimes a decade before you're really stable and strong again. Very many times, church leaders do not know how to helpfully respond. Even the ones who were very compassionate and very kind and had wonderful hearts were not trained in how to respond. And even those who did try to help in those first 3 or 4 weeks after the news hit the fan and the church is in reeling and everybody is trying to figure out what to do, 6 months later, a year later, 3 years later, well, my kids and I are still on food stamps. They've got plenty of other things on their mind, and it never occurred to most of them just how long the journey is for those who have had their lives blown up by someone else's choices. And I don't think that's their fault necessarily. I don't blame them for not knowing. So I started over with all of his debts and no income and no house very shortly after that. We were homeless for 4 months. We had a suitcase apiece in the back of my Honda, and we floated from family to friend to different people. And the church brethren helped to try to hide the paper trail of the criminal content that had been found on his computer. And he remained an ordained minister in good standing. I was the one who looked like I was crazy. At the end of that first explosion, as I started to gather my wits about me very early on, I knew that I didn't want other women to have to go through this in isolation like I had, which is why I do what I do and have been ever since. I had homeschooled my kids. Now I needed to go work full time, try to get on my feet because I'd gotten stuck with all of his debts and all of his expenses, and he had taken his last check and wiped out the kids' piggy banks and hit the road and left the state. I ended up being dragged through nearly a decade of custody litigation trying to keep my kids safe, because once he was gone, they started telling me things I hadn't known. And when I entered that, well, I had no idea how the court system worked. I had no idea how the therapy system worked. I had no idea what social workers were looking for. I had no idea that morality, if it wasn't resulting in a jail sentence, didn't matter to court. I had no clue, and I was coming at it from a very conservative mother perspective. I just want to keep my kids safe. My kids can't be exposed to this stuff. My kids have been hurt, they've been harmed, they've been assaulted, all this stuff going on. I want to keep my kids safe. And your mother bear gets turned on. And if you've had to fight for your kids, you know what kind of sleep loss I'm talking about. I remember coming back from meetings with my attorney and going straight to the shower and getting in the shower with the water running, because it was the only place I could sob like a little baby without my kids seeing me cry, because I was scared to death. And even the people who feel sorry for you or have compassion haven't got a clue what it's like to live in fear of your children's physical, mental, psychological, emotional, spiritual, and sexual safety when they're so little, nobody takes anything they have to say serious. And nobody who isn't living it understands the toll that a decade of that takes, much less the $200,000 in cumulative legal fees and the fact that you can't afford to do anything to get yourself off of food stamps because it's the only way your kids can go to the doctor, and mine has like 16 specialists. And I fought to the point of illness, chronic illness, to keep them safe. Now it's been a decade and my kids they're teenagers and they're doing so well. They come and drape their arms over me, both of them. How you doing down there, little mama? And they love it. They love the fact that they're so much taller. I am not a rare story. That's the thing. There are over 10,000 women in my Wilderness to Wild support groups. My story isn't an exception. I know some of you here and some of the people that were here yesterday, they've lived the same kinds of things. So my story isn't rare. I just happen to be in a place to talk about it and to use it as fuel to train others, fuel to train coaches, fuel to help others, fuel to coach others through those high conflict kind of things. Because you know what? I'll tell you what, if I had known what I know now when I started, I would have handled the litigation side of my case very differently. And it would have cut off years and possibly $150,000 if I had known what I know now. So now I work with women and sometimes men. I have some guys that are clients who are going through the same thing that so many of my women are going through. And I work with them on how to respond, how to write, how to get the most out of their attorney, how to organize their evidence, how to get clarity, how to deal with the love bombing and the psychological games, because it doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl. If somebody is playing games with your head and jacking with your good conscience and making you feel guilty and shamed for all of the things when you're just trying to stay safe and hold a boundary, that's hard. It's very hard. So that's a lot of what I do now. It's so easy as church members, as church leaders, as supporters of our church leaders. It is so easy to keep everything focused on the positive, on the miracles, on the praises, on the good things that God has done, on the blessings, on the progress that we see. And that is good. It is wonderful. But when you're going through things like this, very often it feels hollow because it's far less common to grieve with those who grieve than it is to rejoice with those who rejoice. We find it very easy to come alongside and rejoice with those who rejoice. We want to share that happiness. I want some of that. Give me some sunshine. But when someone's grief won't quit, when you're in a 10-year custody litigation for sexual assault for children, when you are being dragged through astronomical legal fees and therapists 3 times a week and doctor's appointments, and your life is falling apart and you make just too much to qualify for whatever assistance there is, and you're stuck in that gray area. I see heads nodding. Some of you have lived this. And you can't get a job because you don't qualify for daycare, but you don't qualify for daycare vouchers unless you have a job, but you can't leave your kids with anybody because you don't have daycare, because you can't have a house, because you can't have a job to pay for the rent. I mean, it's like a snake eating its own tail, and the noose gets tighter and tighter and tighter around your neck. And it's very hard to hear someone stand up and talk about their great, awesome week, or to hear your preacher talk about how if you just forgive and pray, everything's going to be awesome, because that's what happens when you're a child of God. And you're like, that means I must not be a child of God. So in journeying through these seasons of healing, it is so incredibly important for those of us who are actively involved in faith communities to recognize when someone first is in need, there is only one answer, and that is safety, not reconciliation, not forgiveness, not questions about your prayer life, not anything else but safety. And over time, as you are safe for long enough and it becomes a new baseline, then you reach the season of stability. You're a little less in survival mode, but it's still tenuous, because a letter from your attorney or a 20 text blast from your ex, or your kid getting in an accident or hurting themselves can throw you right back into that early season of just needing safety again. But once we have safety established and we move into stability, after stability is there long enough, we begin moving into the season of strength. Now, pause. I do not mean that you are not strong when you are seeking safety, because that takes courage and strength. I do not mean that there is no strength involved in creating that stability, because that takes courage and strength. But when you are living in strength, you are no longer just trying to be strong enough to get safe or strong enough to get stable. And this is where we are able to turn around and help others. This is where we are able to step back and assess, wow, what were the belief systems that made me stay so long? But far too often in the church, we try to get people to do that in safety. And that is not what anyone needs from us if we are a support person in the beginning. Safety must come first. It's also very crucial to remember that there are overt, violent domestic abuse situations. And people who are suffering overt, violent domestic abuse desperately need help. But there are also covert, coercive, difficult to discern abuse situations. And very often, these are the ones who are the victims married to a community pillar. They're married to the guy in the pulpit, like me. They're married to someone everyone loves. And the abuser in these situations is not throwing you into the wall or leaving bruises and sending you to the emergency room. They're psychologically disassembling you piece by piece until you have no idea you're even a human anymore. Your autonomy is gone, your identity is erased, and you've given up the will to live. These are the ones that need support, but often don't know they need it. And they are most likely to be missed by the church because the perpetrator is indispensable to the leadership team. The one who shows up for every project, they're everyone's favorite. And that makes it hard. And if you come forward and you're the victim and you're like, hey, I'm experiencing XYZ, and everyone else knows the public version of this person, they'd be like, you'd be crazy. I want to give 3 things this afternoon that you can do in your local community, your faith community, your neighborhood community, your workplace, but specifically your faith community, because that's what we're focused on today. 3 things that you can do tangibly to make your faith community a safer place. And these are not a magic bullet. They are not things you are likely to be able to accomplish alone. But you can go back to your faith community and you can agitate nicely and advocate fiercely for these things to be put in place. 3 things if you want to write them down. And the first one is your faith community needs to establish clear policies and training, because it doesn't matter what your gut says or what you've observed. If there's no policy to back it up, nobody's going to do a thing. So policies are only as good as the people who put them into place. But if there's no policy, it doesn't matter what you want to put into action. You can't, because legally you are vulnerable. So the policy needs to come first, and then it also needs to be implemented. It's a both and, not an either or. So developing policies, creating and implementing clear policies that address domestic violence and child abuse, including guidelines for identifying, reporting, and responding to abuse. You've got to ensure that the policies comply with local laws and emphasize a zero tolerance approach to abuse. It's very important to consult with outside organizations that have expertise in building safety, in legal reporting, in who in your state are actually mandatory reporters, because different states have different laws. It's important to know what is legally required. Your policies should, at the minimum, meet the local legal requirements. That is not where they should stop, but at the minimum, they should meet the local legal requirements. In the faith community, we have a moral mandate to protect the vulnerable that should be higher than the bare legal minimum. But so many churches don't even reach the bare legal minimum, so that's a good baseline as a step 1. It's important to consult with outside organizations that have expertise in safety policies, not to just get 2 or 3 volunteers from the community or the congregation or the deacons team to figure it all out. You need to make sure that you're covering all your bases. Part 2 of this is to provide training. Train your staff, train your volunteers, train your clergy on recognizing signs of abuse, understanding the dynamics of domestic violence, and knowing how to respond appropriately. And this training should cover mandatory reporting requirements. It should cover the knowledge of danger and lethality assessment. If there has ever been non-fatal strangulation, that means hands over the neck, pillow over the face, any form of restraining breath raises that person's risk of homicide by 750%. If there are guns, the presence of guns in the home raises the risk of homicide by 500%. So knowing these things is important. Bring in trained experts with evidence-based material to make sure that what you're teaching your church is thorough and accurate. Here's number 2, create a safe and confidential environment for reporting. And you know what? This is probably one of the hardest things, because in church, everybody knows everybody, right? And everybody's friends with everybody. And especially if you are experiencing abuse from a covert individual, then they're going to be friends and buddies with people that you are supposed to be going to report. One of the best things that you can do is create an environment where reporting is encouraged straight to law enforcement, instead of encouraging people to funnel it all through Pastor so-and-so or Elder so-and-so or the director of this department. Because you never know, to be quite honest, whether or not that person or people are going to act appropriately. Now, is it good to have a team? Yes. Is it good to have a trained team that can do triage? Yes. But everyone on those teams and the people in your congregation should know that the baseline expectation is if there is suspicion of abuse or there is an experience of abuse, you are going to go to law enforcement. You are not handling this internally. You are not trying to figure it out inside the church walls. It will be handled by people who are trained to handle it. I have these posters. They're outside on the table. And you can take as many of them as you would like. A lot of churches put them on the inside back of the restroom stalls. Some people take them and give them to their gynecologist's office to put on the inside of the stalls in the bathroom, or the pediatrician, or your local WIC dispensary, or other clinics, bars, restaurants, library restrooms. You can have things like this in the church lobby. Now, here's what that will do. It will do 2 things. 1, you have a direct conduit for those who are quietly suffering abuse to get support, and it's easily accessible. The back of the restroom stalls is great because it is a private place where you can scan a QR code. Nobody's going to see you pulling out your phone, trying to take that card off of a table or whatever else if you're not free to do so. It does a second thing, though, and this is good or bad depending on how you look at it. Partners who are abusive won't want their partners being abused going to your church. So on one hand, that makes your church safer, right? Because when an abusive partner comes in and they see all of these things about abuse, and this is how to report, and this is our 0 tolerance policy, they're like, we're not staying here. They're too liberal for us, or they're too conservative for us, or whatever it is. So it makes your church a safer place. The flip side of that is people who most need the support may or may not continue attending your church. But if they see it, they still know that the resources are there because it was publicly available. Now, having supportive response protocols is also part of this, so that if anyone who comes forward and says, hey, I think this is happening, that your pastors, your church counselors are trained to refer. Recognize signs when there are power and control issues in place and say, I think we shouldn't do couples counseling. Maybe we should meet individually for a little while. Or I feel like this is not really in my wheelhouse. I'm going to refer you to so-and-so and you, the other partner, to so-and-so. And I'm going to recommend as your pastor or as your local church counselor that this is our course of action. And in 6 months, let's meet here again and reassess. Split them up, because couples counseling is always contraindicated if there is abuse or sexual addiction, some sort of compulsive entitlement in place. Now, third thing, partner with local organizations and experts, and that is why you are here, right? As we talk about being able to have your church people trained to refer out, you need to know where is safe to refer them. So having a location like the Family Justice Center, which 14 in Tennessee, I mean, that's a lot. There's 3 in Georgia, none in Florida. Having a location like this means you can refer to a one-stop shop and know that they will get resources for any of these number of different things that they may need. It's very important as a local church to know where you are referring people to. And last, in partnering, is to regularly invite experts and trainers to continually be doing education and awareness for your congregation. When you have a third of women and a quarter of men experiencing domestic violence, this is not a back burner issue. This is a 40 to 50% of your congregation issue. This is a life and death issue for half or more of the children in your children's programs. So if your church prioritizes it, then you can show that by scheduling regular educational things and making it a part of your church, ongoing church culture. Now, some experts or sources for expert resources have already been mentioned. I want to throw out a few others that are absolutely fabulous if you want to write these down. One is Grace, Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Experience, I think. Banner Institute is bannersolutions.net, and they have a 2-day intensive training that just will blow your mind. My organization, Wild, I train coaches. I used to do more training intensives and that kind of thing. That's just really hard on my body and my nervous system, especially after going through cancer and long COVID and a car wreck and all kinds of stuff. So I can't do as much of that anymore. But what I do is we have Wild Institute, and we have a 12 to 18 month comprehensive training program for coaches, therapists, and advocates who want to add this certification, either to start a coaching business or to enhance their education. So those are the 3 things that you can do. Establish clear policies and training, create a safe, confidential environment for reporting, and partner with local organizations and bring in experts. Now, before I'm done, I do want to share just a few things. I've given each of you these cards, and there are stacks of more of them out on the table if you would like to take a handful and distribute them. The QR code on our posters has a direct link to our Trauma Mamas app, which is a free mobile app, and it has the Is This Abuse free video course on it, provided at no cost everywhere in the world in the English language. We also have a packet of free materials in Spanish that can be downloaded completely free from the Wilderness to Wild website. In addition to that, almost every month, I do a workshop, and my focus is primarily on clarity and strategy for those who are going through high conflict litigation, divorce, custody battles. So the workshop that's coming up October 22nd is how to text your ex without losing your mind and show the judge the truth. If you've ever been through a high conflict separation and divorce, one of the most common things that I hear women say is I had to turn my phone off. I had to change my text message sound from my ex. My stomach would clench. My hands would start shaking just if my phone had a text message. I see heads nodding. It's very common. So how do you navigate that? And how do you write back without getting triggered in a way that backfires in court? So that's our next workshop. Our last workshop was how to teach your children to recognize abuse without ever mentioning your ex. So those of you that are co-parenting with an abusive partner, you can't tell your kids all the abusive things your partner's doing, right? That's a fast track to losing custody. But you can teach your children how to recognize the signs of tricky behavior, of dishonesty, of manipulation, of gaslighting. And those are things they can use in the classroom, on the playground, in their sports teams, on school clubs, in future jobs. And if you take it from that broad base, putting it in childhood language, you're giving them life skills. If you have a highly abusive partner, smart kids are going to figure those out. So I teach you how. We have workshops on how to set boundaries that don't backfire. We have workshops on how to develop a new healthy sexual ethic for yourself after divorce when everything seems like it's upside down. So we do all of these. We have these as one-off workshops, but also I have a membership that is a monthly coaching club. And until next month, it's just $9 a month. It's the most affordable group coaching club for this market anywhere that I know of. And we meet once a month for a live interactive group session. And then all of those go into the vault where group members can access them anytime, and they get free access to the workshops. So we have all of these different things, as well as our Wild Institute, our Shiro one-year transformation healing online course, and our team of coaches that have now graduated from Wild Institute. Oh, this is really cool. We just brought on our first deaf coach. So one of our newest coaches is certified in ASL. She is hearing and a proficient full-time ASL translator. And she is able to provide one-on-one sessions with deaf survivors who need the ASL accessibility. So that is super exciting. We also have coaches who focus on navigating the grief that comes with chronic illness and disabilities after experiencing trauma. We have those that focus on church hurt, on spiritual abuse, on rebuilding healthy relationships just in your family and friendships when you've been taught to have no boundaries. So we have coaching, courses, and community. We have about 10,000 women in our online free Facebook groups, and there are a lot of resources. You've heard a ton of resources here today from the local community, and I hope that as you leave and go forward today, that you feel empowered and that you feel that you've got a Rolodex now of ways that you can refer out and also bring expertise in for your local community to make sure that survivors in your faith community are supported.